In the 1980s, no other musician was like George Lynch. Lynch was unique, while everyone else was obsessed with speed and the gleaming gleam of glam metal. He was unsettling, unpolished, and gruff. There was more to his sound than skill. It was impulses that had been cruelly subdued and anger that had been meticulously refined. George Lynch immediately established himself as one of the most distinctive guitarists in the hard rock and metal genres. He first rose to fame with Dewan before splitting out with Lynch Mob, his solo project. People were drawn into a maze by his riffs and were unable to escape. The beating rhythm of rage, defiance, and a longing for freedom was all that remained. But the man who composed the music was a man with a lot of ideas. They are strange, unyielding, and frequently highly polarizing, but they are always truthful. At one point, he was abruptly removed from A.Z. Osbourne's band after being charged with defaming a major record label. When he thought the term Lynch Mob no longer reflected his values, he even dropped it. Additionally, George Lynch has been burning for more than 40 years because he refuses to compromise. It's like a fire that is still burning, wild, unpredictable, and never put out. Not attention, not a neatly wrapped tale. Childhood. On September 28, 1954, George Lynch was born in Spokane, Washington. It was a little, chilly place where art was generally not supported. Young George's family had no musical background and was not wealthy. However, he turned to sound as an escape from the monotony of his home life. When he was just 10 years old, he bought his first guitar because it made him feel alive rather than because he wanted to be famous. Lynch didn't experience any significant trauma as a child, but he felt quite different and alone around children who followed instructions. The person who never quite fit in was George. He turned to music for solace. Although he enjoyed a wide variety of music, his favorite solos were by Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimi Hendrix. He devoured them as if they were codes to a different realm. When Lynch was a youngster, his family relocated to Sacramento, California. He began performing in school bands there and expressing all of his wild, creative impulses. Lynch learned his technique by listening to records, disassembling amplifiers, and experimenting with any sound effect he could think of because he lacked formal instruction. It marked the beginning of his vocal style. Unusual, erratic, and unconstrained. In high school, George was a member of the ridiculously named band Sergeant Rocks. He had no interest in fame or wealth, even if it was at a filthy tavern or a dilapidated practice room. All he wanted was to hear his guitar. George Lynch's determination to defy established conventions and artistic standards that he believed to be soulless was one of the things that shaped him as a young man. From Dewan and Lynch Mob to his solo work, that spirit persisted across all of his albums. He was a reclusive individual who refused to allow anyone to control his music. Early years. During California's hard rock wave in the late 1970s, George Lynch made a very tough decision. Strive to establish himself in a field full of gifted individuals. He didn't have any connections or a tutor to help him, so he played in several obscure bands, but his sharp, bold, and distinctive guitar technique was always noticeable. With the Boys, one of his first popular bands, Lynch established himself in the Los Angeles underground music scene. The lads helped George gain recognition in the industry, which is why Sharon Osbourne asked him to try out for A.Z. Osbourne in 1982, even though he didn't land a big record deal. That incident appeared to be the turning point in his life. After a successful tryout, Lynch was abruptly sacked and Jake E. Lee was hired to replace Randy Rhoads. Why? The individual you ask would decide that. Lynch believed that Sharon was not a fan of his music. He didn't have the appropriate work attire, according to others. It was awful, but it also opened George's eyes and damaged his pride. That was his final attempt to blend in. He decided to find the ideal location and play his own game. Swedish-born singer Don Dewan was searching for a talented musician to join his new band at the moment. They invited George to try out. This time, he didn't lose the opportunity. Don's outrageous singing and Lynch's ferocious, chaotic guitar playing created a sound that was both seductive and perilous. It was structured but never far from disaster. In 1983, Dawkins joined Electro Records, and George Lynch started playing professionally. Breaking the Chains, their debut album, was a shaky one. However, Tooth and Nail, 1984, was a significant advancement. George Lynch was more than simply an obscure artist after that. He rose to prominence in the American heavy metal scene. He entered the 1980s as a fighter who had previously been rejected. However, George Lynch began rewriting the story in his own style while holding a guitar, making it bold, belligerent, and difficult to manage. Peak with DeWan's personal issues. George Lynch rose to prominence as one of the most well-known guitarists in the American glam hard rock movement in the mid-1980s. The band that assisted him in getting there was Dokken. After a sluggish beginning with 1983's Breaking the Chains, Dawkins' career took off with Tooth and Nail in 1984. This platinum-selling album introduced many rock listeners to George Lynch's piercing riffs and emotionally intense, shape-shifting solos. He performed rapidly, with much detail, but always with emotion. Many of George Lynch's songs, such as Into the Fire, Just Got Lucky, and the beautiful power ballad Alone Again, were huge hits, but the instrumental Mr. Scary, which was so gloomy, terrifying, and unrelenting, truly captured the essence of his artistic vision. It sounds like the voice of someone who is caught between being intelligent and losing their mind. George was more than just DeWan's guitarist. He developed into a singular creative force with his own world after that performance. Success followed success. Under Lock and Key sold over 1 million copies in 1985. Songs like Heaven Sent, Burning Like a Flame, and Dream Warriors, which was used in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, made Back for the Attack a massive smash in 1987. Together with Mötley Crüe, Rat, and Scorpions, DeWan rose to prominence as one of the top metal bands in the U.S. Though the band was under a lot of stress, Lynch was a sonic warrior on stage with a fierce playing style, hand-painted custom ESP guitars, and a distinctive presence. Despite their success, George Lynch and Don DeWan, two of the group's most imaginative members, were at conflict with one another. George created the band's sound and technical core, while Don authored the lyrics and made decisions about how the group should sound and market themselves. In the studio, backstage, and even on stage, there are two enormous egos and two opposing philosophies that are always at odds. Both of them later admitted that there were moments during their month-long travels when they didn't speak to one another at all. In one instance, George would not record if Don was present and would leave the studio during a practice. The band's music was more like what you'd hear on the radio, according to Don. On the Monsters of Rock tour in 1988, Dokken performed with major bands like Van Halen, Metallica, and Scorpions, but George wanted to move into more technical, creative, even darker and stranger ground territory. At that point, everything collapsed. Even though they were strangers behind the scenes, they gave it their all every night in front of tens of thousands of spectators. Don Dawkins secretly began recording a solo album. Dawkins officially disbanded in 1989 when the tour concluded. This was the end of a band that many people liked, but for George Lynch, it was like breaking free. I don't want to say who was right or wrong, he continued, but I knew I couldn't keep playing music my heart no longer believed in. Dokken broke up. George Lynch got rid of his old reputation and cut ties with a big brand and got ready for his own trip, one that doesn't give in or set limits. He was alone with his guitar, which was like a sword that had never been broken. Lynch Mob, a trip to freedom and a fresh start. When Dawkins broke up, George Lynch didn't join an already known band to take it easy or rest. He instead made his own group, Lynch Mob, as a clear statement that he would no longer live in anyone else's shadow. Lynch Mob was formed in 1989 with the spirit of a band made from ashes. It is fierce, nasty, and will not bend at all. Their first record, Wicked Sensation, which came out in 1990, was the best proof of that. With strong vocals tinged with blues from Oni Logan, the record mixed traditional hard rock with the dark, tired tones George had been wanting to explore for a long time. Tones that Don Dokken once said couldn't sell. From River of Love and No Bed of Roses to the title track Wicked Sensation, George let his imagination run wild. The riffs growled without going overboard, and the solos were like inner conversations, sometimes screaming and sometimes as cold as steel. It sold more than 500,000 copies, which is pretty good for a brand new band that came out at a time when MTV was moving away from classic metal. But the good luck didn't last. Very soon after the first album came out, Oni Logan quit the band, and Lynch Mob went through a long time of instability. The singers changed all the time, from Robert Mason to John West, and from Michael Stryper to Andrew Freeman. Each one gave the band a different sound, but they also made it harder to tell who they were. George kept being creative, but he didn't have a real partner like he did with Dokken. Lynch Mob put out a few more records in the 1990s and 2000s, including Lynch Mob 1992, Smoke This 1999, Revolution 2003, and Smoke and Mirrors 2009. But they were never as good as they were in the beginning. Changes in what people like were one reason. Alternative rock and grunge ruled the scene. Another part was that George didn't want to follow the crowd. He followed his gut instead of what the market wanted. For George, though, Lynch Mob was never just about making music. He turned it into a place to try new things, break rules, and tell side stories that were sometimes rough and radical, but always honest. The band mixed funk and groove at times and went back to standard metal at other times. At times, it seemed like George was only making songs for himself. In 2020, during a time of racial justice movements and social reckoning in the US, George made news when he said he would stop using the term lynch mob because he thought it was inappropriate to use because it had a history of racist violence. George said, "I can't keep using that name just because it's well known if it no longer makes me feel good." Some fans were upset by the choice, but it showed something more important. George Lynch was more than just a guitar player. He was a man of his word. He was ready to give up a brand that had his name on it in order to keep his music and his honor. Lynch Mob was born from the ashes of Dewan as a way to start over. Not to beat anyone else, but to finally let George Lynch be himself. Lynch Mob is no longer a big band, but it is still the way he expresses everything that isn't said in riffs, silences, and leads that sound different every time. Later projects and ideas about music. In the 1980s, glam metal was all the rage. But George Lynch didn't go away when Lynch Mob lost its popular appeal. Instead, he moved into a new age where he wasn't tied to one band, but could roam freely like a musical nomad. That's when people started to really understand how deep an artist who had broken every rule was. Lynch began to work with others on a lot of different creative projects. Kendrick co-founded KXM with Doug Pinnick, King's X, and Ray Luzier. It was one of his most famous projects. Korn, progressive funk, and groove metal were mixed on their first record, KXM 2014. This was a sound that no one expected from the former Dokken guitarist. George let his mind travel through distorted, fragmented, and contemplative soundscapes on KXM, which was outside the norm and proudly not commercial. Over the course of 3 albums, KXM showed a Lynch who was still brave, but now more grown, deep, and reflective than ever. He started Sweet and Lynch, a melodic hard rock project with Aor influences with Michael. They also played with KXM. Their music focused more on melody and spiritual depth. The project didn't do very well at the box office, but it showed a more mature George Lynch. He didn't just show off his skills. He knew when to take a step back, listen, and join the message. Lynch got back together with old Dawkins friends Jeff Pilsen and Weil McBrown to make the In Machine, which is a more grown-up version of what used to be. It wasn't a copy of Dewan. Instead, it was a spiritual, continuing, shaped by life. Lynch showed that he could still bring back the energy of old-school hard rock with songs like Burn the Truth and Leap of Faith. Besides working on music projects, George started Mr. Scary Guitars, a brand of custom guitars that he makes by hand using his own ideas. The guitars are works of art in their own right. Unfinished, rough, and completely one of a kind. That is the best form of George Lynch. He only makes what he believes in and the sounds that make his heart beat faster. No mass production or patterns. Lynch's ideas about music have long since outgrown his method. He once said, "Don't care about playing the fastest or most difficult stuff anymore. All I want to do is play something sincere and genuine." Therefore, George took the less traveled route and continued to create, change, and remake himself, while many of his peers sought to preserve the final remnants of light through reunions and nostalgia tours. George Lynch never aspired to be a musician. The journey is rocky and winding, but it always ends at the same spot, where he can be himself. He first took up the guitar when he was 10 years old. It has been the one thing that has consistently brought him back ever since. Life in general. One of the most well-known performers during the heyday of American hard rock was George Lynch. However, he has never discussed his private life. He was never renowned for having scandalous romances, going to too many parties, or leading a crazy life. Rather, he went into a path that emphasized introspection and creativity. That being said, he has experienced his fair share of arguments, strained relationships, and scandal. George Lynch is known to have been married and to have had children. Mariah Lynch, his daughter, is a musician and artist. He rarely discusses his family, but he has frequently stated that being a father helped him stay grounded when the lengthy flights became difficult and the stage lights went out. For the past few years, he has led a modest life in California, finding contentment in nature, motorcycles, and handcrafted guitars. After years of turmoil, it was a means for him to return to peace. However, that particular exchange has landed George Lynch into a lot of difficulty, and he has never been one to give in lightly. The long-running conflict with Don Dokken within the corporation was the first major issue. Their arguments, blame games, and recurring cycles of splitting up and reuniting captivated the media for decades. Lynch frequently complained that Don had too much control over everything. Don, however, said that Lynch was unstable and had drug issues. Their altercation became a tale that persisted for over 30 years, frustrating many admirers and thwarting numerous attempts to reconcile. George sparked even more controversy in 2018 when he publicly claimed that PV Electronics employed prisoners to produce their goods. The remark infuriated the corporation, which requested that it be withdrawn. They were also afraid of legal action, but George refused to back down. He maintained that exploiting people is not a viable way for the music industry to survive. He received scathing criticism for the comment, as well as tremendous support. Lynch ceased using the term lynch mob in 2020 as his feelings over racial inequality in the United States became more intense. The term had come to represent his career and incorporated his last name. However, George chose to overlook it because the name lynch mob recalls a past in which people, primarily African Americans, were put to death for their race. I can't continue to act under a name that I know could be harmful to other people. Reputation doesn't matter more than integrity. Despite the intense reactions of some fans who criticize the decision as being too sensitive or a loss of identity, George remained unwavering. He sees being a good musician as only one aspect of being an artist. It all comes down to having the guts to face the repercussions of the legacy one leaves behind. Beneath his intense guitar playing, George Lynch is a man with strong moral principles, a readiness to stand up to the world when necessary, and convictions. He has never strived to be the ideal rock star, nor has he concealed his shortcomings. Conversely, he allows them to manifest in his choices, lifestyle, and music. He has a single, unwavering belief and is occasionally stubborn but always moral. The musician, their life at the time, and their legacy must all be authentic. George Lynch doesn't appear to be slowing down, even in his 70s. In his artistic career, 2024 and 2025 represent a turning point. It's a culmination full of spirit and fire rather than a conclusion. In keeping with the unwavering principles he has lived by throughout his life, George formally announced Lynch Mob's farewell tour, The Last Ride, in early 2024 in honor of the band's 35th anniversary. The tour, which started in Pennsylvania on February 1st, 2024, and will end in Minnesota on March 22nd, 2025, will include hundreds of performances around the United States and Australia, as well as a memorable appearance on the Monsters of Rock cruise in March 2025. This is more than just a band's farewell for George. It's a tribute to the path that developed with him, defied, failed, and repeatedly reincarnated. For fans who supported Lynch Mob for more than 30 years, he and the band also recorded a new studio album during the tour, as well as a live DVD that captured the last performances. Lynch, however, did not end with Lynch Mob. He continues to pursue other projects with the same creative fervor. He released the End Machine's Quantum Phase in 2024. His ensemble, which reunited previous Dawan members, was infused with the maturity and technical sophistication of seasoned musicians. At industry gatherings like Richie's Music in New Jersey 2025, where audiences come not just to study guitar, but also to comprehend the sound thought of a unique artist, he continues to conduct guitar lessons and share his methods and musical philosophy. George has dabbled in visual work, which is quite personal, in addition to music. His latest endeavor, Electric Ritual, turns the guitar into a creative tool. Each item is signed and numbered separately and combines recorded music with real-world photography. For George, it's a means of playing music with the eyes and feelings rather than the ears, a nexus of sight, sound, and memory. George Lynch's legacy has only been strengthened by these initiatives. He is more than just a guitar legend. He represents unflinching devotion to one's inner voice, unrelenting inventiveness, and sheer artistic disobedience. Despite being frequently disregarded by big award ceremonies, George continues to serve as a model for guitarists of all generations who are seeking truth rather than perfection. Because music has never been a performance to George. It's a rite in which the strings reverberate with loneliness, faith, grief, and the fire of freedom. And that ritual continues to be silent, fierce, and unabated, whether it be with Dawan, Lynch Mob, or any of his innumerable endeavors. Front pages never featured George Lynch's name. To prove anything, he never required golden prizes or #1 hits. Since he first picked up a guitar, the only thing he has ever really required is to be in sync with his sound. George Lynch continues to be a rebellious outsider in a world of music where everything can be neatly categorized into genres, brands, or goods. He never repeats himself, writes riffs like he's cutting blood into strings, and plays the guitar as if it were an instinct. From KXM to the End Machine, from Dawan to Lynch Mob, from enormous stages to Mr. Scary Guitar's small workshop. Everywhere he goes, there's music that communicates the truth while growling, distorting, and resisting. The greatest break of his life was once denied to him. He has faced challenges, controversy, and misunderstandings. However, no one, not even time, has ever been able to shape him. And that might be the greatest legacy of George Lynch. A voice on a guitar that won't go raw. With the same vigor as the man who forged it, it burned defiantly. The albums, the tours, or even the solos might not be what people remember in the end. It's the presence of a constantly evolving artist. And it was probably George Lynch, if you've ever heard a guitar tone that made your heart skip, a harsh, weird, soul-screaming quiet. What say you? Are you prepared to enter a world where people can hear you without your consent? If so, leave a comment below with your thoughts on George Lynch or any guitar-related moment that influenced you. For more stories about artists who are authentic, remember to subscribe.